So this past April, we had our annual LLUH spiritual renewal. We invited Dr. M. Craig Barnes, the president emeritus of Princeton Theological Seminary, to be our speaker. He told us a story that I share with you. Barnes had run to the grocery store. I think his wife had given him some items. He had an item or two, not much. Ran to the grocery store, went in to get what he was going to get, and he had that thought that I've had before. Usually comes back to haunt me, but had that thought that I've had before, and that was, there's really not much. I don't need a cart. So he heads into the grocery store, sees one thing, grabs that, grabs the other thing, and it's like, oh yeah, I think we need that, and grabs that, and man, that looks good. And you know the drill. Before long, he's got so many things in his arms that he can't manage them all. But he's managed to keep them somehow up tight enough against each other that nothing is going to fall unless one of them slips. If just one of them goes, the whole thing goes. So he's coming down the aisle, he's got it all together, and then something shifts and slips, and bam, and all goes everywhere down the aisle, and he's thinking, oh my goodness, anybody watching, hoping he's alone. He looks up, there's this young woman coming his direction, just looking at him. He said, she looked up at me and saw the cans or oranges, whatever it was, rolling down the aisle, the other mess, and she only said one thing. She looked at me, he said, and she said, it's a metaphor. You and I thought that was funny. Nobody else did, but I thought that was funny because I related so much to it in my life. It's a metaphor. You know how it is. You get so many things going, so many demands, so many appointments. Maybe it's classes for you, deadlines, tests, boards, rent is due, all of this stuff, and you've managed to keep it all together in your arms, and you're thinking, I'm okay as long as one thing doesn't shift. But if one thing shifts, and right then, it's as though we hear a voice of an older man, voice of a wise man, who simply says, may I have your attention, please? And we take all this stuff and we try to set it down without dropping it, and we turn to look at it. Yes. And he says to us what's contained in Ecclesiastes 3. So in this series, may I have your attention, please? The last 2 weeks, we've been in the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. And that makes sense. We were in Proverbs last week, Ecclesiastes this week. That makes sense because on themes and in series that are pointedly focused on how we live our lives, you would expect the wisdom literature would have a lot to offer, and it does. So we go to Ecclesiastes 3, to what may be the best known passage in Ecclesiastes. I want to suggest to you that this passage might be aptly summarized in 3 words, just 3 words. Seasons, boundaries, and eternity. Seasons, boundaries, and eternity. So we begin with seasons. I'm going to read the first verse because in most translations, the first verse is seen as the introductory statement to the poem that will come next. So read the first verse, Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 1. He says, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. Seasons. You've lived in seasons, possibly. I've lived in seasons. I lived in the tropics when we grew up, and there were basically 2 seasons a year, rainy season and dry season. So it was either hot and muggy, humid, or it was hot and dry and dusty. The temperature varied very little. It was just rainy season or dry season. Then we moved to Texas, and the seasons got more pronounced. It was blistering hot in the summer, hot and dry. And then when the winter came, it actually got quite cold, very cold, because we were in the north central part of the state, got very cold, and then the wind would start to blow, and I can remember that wind just cut through you like a hot knife through butter. That's not a great metaphor for something cold, but try not to think about it. So this wind comes in, and it just is so freezing, and I'm now getting a sense of much greater realities in terms of seasons. And then I go to Andrews University, Berrien Springs, Michigan. Tucked away right there, nestled in the southwest part of the state, right where the lake effect is best, so that all that snow gets dumped right there, and suddenly I knew what seasons were. Have mercy, I'd never seen anything. I had no idea that your car door would freeze shut. You couldn't open it. I didn't know those kinds of things. It was a whole new introduction. I realized how cold it was one day when I was walking to my early morning class, 7:30, 8 o'clock class, all the way across campus. I had my big long overcoat, and as I'm walking along, I'm thinking, I don't even need this thing. It's really warmed up. I don't want to lug this around all day, so I'm looking at my watch, trying to figure out if I have time to run it back to the room or not. I didn't have time, so I took it with me. I got over where I could see the temperature. 20 degrees. But it had been like negative 15, 18 for the last 2 or 3 days. It had warmed up almost 40 degrees. And it was 20 degrees. And I remember thinking, good heavens, when 20 degrees is warm, it's time to head south. I can't take these seasons. Now, I hear people from the north, I heard it then, I've heard it more recently, say, I love the seasons. And I get it. The fiery foliage of the fall, the clean, clear white of the winter, the springing up green of the spring, the luxuriant verdure and fruitfulness of the summer. I get it. It's beautiful. But I love these seasons. When it's plunging into the low 60s at night and soaring into the mid 70s in the daytime, I love those seasons. Not quite the others. So the wise man draws on that concept of seasons to say we live our lives in seasons. Now that's an important reality to understand because that will directly inform the kinds of decisions we make about how to live at different points in our lives. I'd like to read you the words of Neil Postman in a book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, when he writes about this reality of seasons and how much we've lost a sense of those seasons and have become dominated by this. Postman writes and says, in Mumford's great book, Techniques in Civilization, he shows how, beginning in the 14th century, the clock made us into timekeepers, then time savers, and now time servers. In the process, we have learned irreverence toward the sun and the seasons. For in a world made up of seconds and minutes, the authority of nature is superseded. Indeed, as Mumford points out, with the invention of the clock, eternity ceased to serve as the measure and focus of human events. And thus, though few would have imagined the connection, the inexorable ticking of the clock may have had more to do with the weakening of God's supremacy than all the treatises produced by the philosophies of the Enlightenment. That is to say, the clock introduced us to a new form of conversation between man and God in which God appears to have been the loser. Perhaps Moses should have included another commandment, thou shalt not make mechanical representations of time. What different lives we would have lived. So, he says, we live in seasons. And there are times for the activities that we need to perform. One more 3-sentence statement from David Finkbeiner, professor of theology. Wisdom is about proper timing. The wise man recognizes that the same is true of life under the sun. Every event under the sun has its proper time, as is seen in the poem that follows. So we're about to read the poem in the next part. But just to underline this reality, we live our lives in seasons. Wise living is living in ways that makes decisions based on the season of life in which we live. Now the poem. So he's going to write this poem about the things for which we have time, the things that happen in our lives. It's maybe the best known section of the book of Ecclesiastes. I read it this morning out of Eugene Peterson's paraphrase, The Message. He's just said, there's a season for everything, a time for every activity under heaven. And then he says this, a right time for birth and another for death. A right time to plant and another to reap. A right time to kill and another to heal. A right time to destroy and another to construct. A right time to cry and another to laugh. A right time to lament and another to cheer. A right time to make love and another to abstain. A right time to embrace and another to part. A right time to search and another to count your losses. A right time to hold on and another to let go. A right time to rip out and another to mend. A right time to shut up and another to speak up. A right time to love and another to hate, a right time to wage war, and another to make peace. What he's saying is, for all of these things, he's using these as examples. There are many that he doesn't mention, but these are representative examples. He says, for all of the key things of life, there's a season. There's a time. If our first word is seasons, maybe our next word should be boundaries. Because it's within the boundaries of the extremes of each of these couplets that we live. Between birth and death, between laughter and tears, between all of the others that unfold, we live on this continuum. Wise living says, where am I and what are the actions that equate, that are commensurate with where I am in the seasons and within the boundaries of my life? So you might want to remember 2 or 3 things as you read this poem. First of all, remember this. The wise man is not writing about how life should be. He's writing about how life is. He's not saying this is the way God has designed it, to die, to have war, those kinds of things. He's just saying this is the way life is. Then he's describing the extremes of each of the spectrums that he talks about. Birth and death, laughter and tears. He's trying to say something about that entire experience. After all, listen to the words of Old Testament scholar Edward Curtis. He writes about that by saying, the words of the poem indicate that this is a comprehensive picture of life in the world. The author uses a literary device known as a merism, in which two opposites, birth and death, seeking and losing, imply all the activities that lie between the two poles. The number 7 sometimes symbolizes completion, and the 14 pairs of opposites, 2 times 7, suggest that the poem covers the spectrum of what ordinarily occurs in life. The list describes what people do rather than what they should do, and each individual will not necessarily experience every activity. Some endeavors can be understood either concretely or metaphorically, and the author likely intended to leave these options open for the reader. So what he's saying, here are the boundaries. Death is on this side, over here is birth. Birth to death. He's implying life. All of life is lived between these two boundaries. Or he says, laughter and tears. All of the emotions you experience occur between these two boundaries. He talks about the boundaries as a way of saying, you live somewhere in the midst of this. Make decisions about where you live so as to be able to respond appropriately to that. That's the second thing to remember. The way life is, not the way it should be. He's describing the extremes, the boundaries. And thirdly, if you read this, you'll notice there is a certain relentlessness about that he writes about. Many of these things are not things you can schedule or prevent. They come when it's time. I mean, after all, he starts out, there is a time to be born and there is a time to die. Just within the last 2 weeks, baby was born here in our community. Dana Brockman. Some of you know Dana. I saw Dana and Brendan and their Coco, their child before they have 2 now. Church, a couple weeks ago. Standing, talking afterwards. When are you due? Oh, still about 6 weeks. Just chit-chat after church. And then a week and a half later, somebody comes to staff meeting and says, she's had her baby. And I said, what? I'm trying to think, has that been 6 weeks? Did time pass that fast? I said, man, that was fast. I said, oh, no. It's a very different reality. Here's what happened. Here, a few nights ago, a week or 2 ago, her water breaks. Quick, to the hospital. Jump in the car, break the red light, run the red light. We got to get there. Gets there. Brendan runs into the hospital to find a wheelchair to bring out, to help her in, to have her baby. He gets out. She's had the baby. In the car, delivered it herself. From breaking water to delivery, 15 minutes. Have mercy. And when the baby came out, the baby said, time to be born, or something like that. Imagine. We were talking to our daughter, lives across the country, East Coast. Said just about 4 or 5 days ago, so I was talking to a friend here, one of the other residents' wives, and said, hey, a friend of mine just had her baby in the car. Her husband's a resident, couldn't get there fast enough. Said, really? What medical school she go to? And named a whole different medical school. Turned out it was a whole different story. Another mom rushing to the hospital, had the baby in the car. Baby said, it's time. And that's part of what the wise man is saying. When the time comes, it is the time. There is a way to respond appropriately in the moment when you understand where you live between these two polarities. A time to be born, a time to die. We know that too. We know the experience sitting in a dimly lit funeral chapel. So stunned the tears almost will not flow. Overwhelmed. We recognize when the time is just by the things we say. It was too early. What a tragedy. Or we say, what a long and good life. I'm sad he's gone, but he was ready. It fits into what the wise man is saying about both seasons and boundaries and making decisions. So how do we respond to that? Well, the wise man is going to say that the way we respond to that is twofold. One way we respond to that is by enjoying the fruit of our work. Enjoying the results of our labors, enjoying life. And the other thing he's going to say is, remember eternity. So that's the third word. Seasons, boundaries, eternity. Ecclesiastes 3, we start in verse 9. What do people really get for all their hard work? I've seen the burden God has placed on us all, yet God has made everything beautiful for its time, its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So I concluded there is nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can, and people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. And I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God's purpose is that people should fear him. What is happening now has happened before and will happen in the future, will happen again, because God makes the same things happen over and over again. Life continues to repeat itself. But what do we do in the light of all these things? Two things, says the wise man. Go home after work on a hot day. Pick lemons from your tree, squeeze some lemonade, and put some sugar in it, folks. A bunch of ice, and sit outside under your back patio and sip lemonade and enjoy the work of your hands. That, says the wise man, is one of the things you do. It's one of the wise ways to live. It's one of the decisions. There is always a season for enjoying the work of your hands. But the second thing he says is don't forget that God has woven eternity into the warp and woof of the human fabric. Eternity is a part of your DNA. Don't forget that. In all the times and all the seasons of your life, there will be moments that you experience where you realize there is something that I yearn for that is beyond this. We often feel that at certain painful moments. A funeral would be an example. You can hear it in the words that are spoken. The family gets up. The kids are together. They're trying to say goodbye to their dad. And in one way or another, they say, Dad, this isn't goodbye. This is we'll see you in the morning. Or they say, the one thing that comforts us right now is the hope that we'll see him again. Contained within those words is what I would call a yearning for permanence. There is in the human heart, in the human soul, this has been tracked in culture, after society, ancient and modern, this yearning, this desire for permanence. C.S. Lewis says it with these words in Mere Christianity: creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. I must keep myself alive, in myself alive, the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to the other country and to help others do the same. In other words, what he says is when you experience that yearning for permanence, that is something the world can never truly fulfill. He sees in it an echo of another country. Eternity. And so the wise man says, in the midst of considering the seasons in which you live, the boundaries within which you live, never forget eternity. But just to keep us grounded on earth, verses 12 and 13 again. Notice again what he says. I concluded there is nothing else, nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor. These are the gifts from God. Enjoy now, remember then. So what are the lessons we take from this? How might we apply this? I have 3 suggestions. We're talking about living attentively in a distracted world. That's the focus of our series, about just paying attention. So I have 3 suggestions. The first one is pay attention to your season. Pay attention to the season of life in which you find yourself. Make sure you understand that season and then make choices that are wise for that season. Here's an example. I lived much of my early life in pursuit of what we call a balanced life. I have to tell you, years ago, I threw that out the window. I don't use a balanced life as a rubric for all the seasons of life anymore. Because there are times when you cannot, indeed you should not live a balanced life if you're going to succeed. You're a medical student, a dental student, a law student. You're a young couple starting a business. You need to include God in every step. You need to find time for family and relationships. But friends, if you aren't spending serious time studying, serious time working, you're in trouble. That's the season of life. That's an appropriate response to that season. On the other hand, here in this community, We have many people come to retire. They come here, it's wonderful weather, low cost of living. So they come to retire here. So when they come to retire, if that is the way they are still living their lives, we got all kinds of trouble. Now the choices to make in this season of life are very different. So ask about your season. What is my season of life? Am I single? Am I married? Do I have kids and a family? If I have kids and a family and I'm living like I don't, need I say more? It's the wrong choice for that season. I can tell you in my own life, I could never have worked the hours I work now when our kids were at home. I wouldn't have had a family left. Seasons. Pay attention to your season. Make choices commensurate with that. Secondly, pay attention to the boundaries. Remember these boundaries in that poem. They talk about the extremes, the ends, they're the boundaries, but they imply everything that goes between them as well. So pay attention to the boundaries and ask yourself, where am I on this boundary? For example, if you are much closer to mourning than to laughter because a loved one has died, pay attention to that. I learned long ago that the earlier and the more intensely you grieve, the sooner you heal. I learned long ago that emotions that are experienced as painful but not expressed as grief will express themselves in some other, much less healthy way. I learned long ago that if you don't complete it, you'll repeat it. So if you say in this boundary having to do with my emotional lives between mourning and laughter, I'm much more on this end, then make choices that reflect that. And if it's a time of laughter, then friends, laugh. Enjoy life. I mean, you heard what he said. Enjoy the work of your hands and praise God for it, but don't forget eternity. Or what about money? I know really well, after having spent many years in this community, that as students, you're living from bank to, registrar's office. Borrowing. So you're having to live really tight. You're borrowing to pay for school. You're borrowing to pay for living. It's tight living. You have to watch your money. That's as it should be at that point in time. But if you come 3 decades into your career and you are still living that tight, that's a problem. Because now what's commensurate with this end of the boundary, with this season of life, is giving back, investing in others, making life better for some who are over there. It's a hard lesson to learn sometimes. Once we learn to grab onto it, we don't want to let go of it. But it's an important lesson to learn. Suze Orman, the financial analyst and writer, says that she was in Mexico and she was struck to see, we've seen this, maybe you have, these parrots on this perch. No cage around them. She could see nothing that was attaching them to the perch, but there they were and they wouldn't leave. She asked the man, what's going on? He says, I've taught them that perch is their safety and security, so they hold on to it. Was it hard to teach them that? Well, when they're little, it's hard. But once they've learned it, you almost cannot unlearn it. So Orman, thinking about that, wrote this. Suddenly a light bulb went off in my head. We are just like those poor parrots. We have been taught to clutch our money as tightly as we can, as if our money is the perch for our safety and security. Just like those parents, we've all forgotten how free we really are with or without the perch. The more afraid we are, the tighter we hold on, and the more we have trapped ourselves. So ask yourselves questions. Where am I on this continuum? Let me respond in the best way and recognize it's hard to unlearn. It's hard to let go. Read a story written by a guy named J.R. Love, actually a real story. He said 4-year-old was in church when the juice and wafers were passed out for communion. His mother leaned over and told him, "You're not old enough to partake in communion." Later, the collection plate came by, and his mother again leaned over and said, "You need to give the nickel I gave you." He's got it in his hand. "You need to give the nickel I gave you," and tried to coax the nickel out of his clenched fist. He held firm and shouted in the service, "If I can't eat, I won't pay." I love that. It's hard to unlearn it. We don't want to let go of it. So pay attention not only to seasons, to your season, but pay attention to boundaries, to where you live within that. And then finally, suggestion number 3, pay attention to eternity. Enjoy life, but pay attention to eternity. I've been struck by reading at times of people who reach the pinnacle and what they say immediately after. They've won the Super Bowl. They've summited Everest. They've scored a bestseller. They've managed to land the corner office in the C-suite. What will they say? I've been struck by the people at times who, in all honesty, ask, is this all there is? Is this it? Dwayne Thomas, Super Bowl winner, stuck a mic in his face. "What do you think, Dwayne, about winning the ultimate game?" He said, "If it's the ultimate game, why do they play it again next year?" Is this all there is? I was struck reading about David Robinson. They called him the Admiral in San Antonio. Excellent basketball player. Winning the championship. He said everybody on the team went out to party to celebrate all night. He said, but I thought about what I'd been given. I went home, climbed in bed with my son, and lay next to him and just said, "Thank you, God. This is what matters." So enjoy life. You were created to love life. But don't forget eternity. Pay attention to eternity. Jesus said it better than anyone else. What does it profit a person if they gain the whole world and lose their own soul? So pay attention to seasons. Pay attention to boundaries. But especially, pay attention to eternity. Because the day will come when you will not say, "Is this all there is?" Instead, you will say, "This is worth everything." And that will be success.